I've heard the argument that no matter what we do, we can try to, do as much as we can, but we still need those people in power, the elite, the people who hold us back. They're the ones that have the keys, and we still need them, and we still need them to come on our side and help us.
See, if we take these big concepts and apply it to daily life, anytime you subject yourself prematurely to the aid of another, you become bound to their influence. The issue is that if you want to achieve anything in daily life, you have to be able to have or to awaken the deep desire for it. One,
you gotta want it first.
You have to want it. It has to be something you're willing to risk your whole life. Or I mean risk it, I mean sacrifice its oneness of focus, singularity of purpose, and take responsibility for it. Once you do that, and you in your circle form a coalition such that you have maximized and utilized everything in your environment possible, then the next stage, that when you need help, you need from coalitions and alliances, then you already have an idea where that help can fit into within your overall plan. Not that the help is coming to dictate the plan. Because what happens is, if you invite someone prematurely into a plan, then if they withdraw, the whole thing collapses.
Right.
That's not what you want.
Right.
You want to be able to say, okay, yeah, this is my brainchild. This is the idea. This is the vision. And then along the way of the vision, the next step of help you need will always come to you. That's how the universe works. Right. If you have an aspiration for something and you move with all your whole heart, then you have built within you a solid foundation. And then when somebody comes to help, they can help out. But if they leave, it doesn't collapse.
It's still going. Right.
Because if you look at governments, right, one of the things about the U.S. that you have to concede and admire is that the office is always greater than the individual. Right. But in many other countries, oftentimes the office is the individual. When the individual leaves, the whole system collapses.
Or it's easily overthrown.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's not how. So it should be that the office is always more powerful than the individual. So in this case, the cause is always more powerful than the individual. If an individual supersedes the cause, then that's when something is off. So in this case, you should build a framework so strong concerning the cause and how you wish to exact change, such that when an individual comes, they're only a small piece, but they are not the foundation itself. And that's what is missing so much in the community. So yeah, of course, even in those things, but it's your neck that's on the line. You have to be willing to put in work. And I think that is what is so essential, to take that responsibility, to say what is within, instead of always seeking, and this is the cancer of we humans in general. We always seek for change in powers or opportunities outside of our immediate circumstance. If only I had more money. Not that if only I could cut out that cafe latte every morning.
Right.
Not that if I can. I don't even watch this.
If I had more money on top of my habits. Yeah.
If only I could date that person. If only I could get this job. But that's just a form of laziness. The first is, what can I sacrifice, and what can I invest, and what type of energy can I infuse to elevate my current conditions, to make it into that ideal that I'm looking for. So that should always be the question. I think when we approach from that mentality, it becomes the person most knowledgeable sometimes in conditions is maybe that drug dealer who took the wrong path. But he knows the inner workings of the streets. He's identified himself with the needs of the individuals. He has such profound insight into what makes the people tick and what doesn't. All he needs in that situation is to harness and give that his information a creative direction and make it knowledge, infuse it with higher virtues, and he'll be the best individual to have ideas to know what comes next. Because that was Malcolm X himself. He came from
he was hustling.
Crucible. So I think that is what is essential, what is within our power, beyond any help. If help comes, it's fine, but what can we do within our authority to make changes in our communities.
Yeah. When you think about Lincoln and Johnson, when they, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, they had to, because of what the people that slavery and segregation, because of what they were dealing with and what those people decided, we're not going to go for this anymore.
And the pressure that was put on them.
Right. If not one slave ever tried to escape their master, Lincoln would have never had a reason to sign the Declaration to free slaves. If all the people who were segregated just accepted it and was like, we're good, there would have been no Martin Luther King at the White House telling Johnson, it's time for you to do something. We can't go any further until you make this illegal. We can continue fighting, we can continue dying in the streets, but equality is not going to happen until this happens first. Now, we are still not fully equal. Minorities of any group are not fully equal because the system that you talk about, the constructs, were not created for us. So no matter how much we try to be a part of that, some people might be successful, but the groups are never going to be successful because it's not created for us. We got to get to a point where that construct is no longer acceptable. Slavery got to a point where it was no longer acceptable. Segregation got to a point where it's no longer acceptable. The society was not going to advance. White society was not going to advance with those things in place. That's the only reason why it became necessary. So I say all that to say, it starts from one person believing that this is actually possible. Like you said, start small. Everything starts small. The person who starts it, or the groups of individuals that start things, look at Google and look at Facebook. Like, those guys started from one idea, and it became this huge thing that a lot of people talk about word association. When you say, or when someone references, let's look up something on the internet, what do they say? Let's Google it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. When people refer to social media, they always say Facebook. The Walkman is a portable stereo cassette player. Everything that is a portable stereo cassette player is called a Walkman. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So it's like those ideas started very small. So when and I think it starts with innovation too, to where you gotta want to innovate, you gotta want to create, you gotta want this to happen, because without that desire, it's like when people start their own businesses, like you said, black-owned banks. For a black-owned bank to be successful, someone in that neighborhood has to feel like it's needed. But if that person says, hey, you know what, I want to start if he never says, I want to start a black-owned bank, then the person in the community who can give him the building or back him financially is never going to be like, you know what, I think there is a need for a black-owned bank in this neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So it's to get the desire, to get the change, you have to want it first.
And so even on a practical level, if you say, oh, let me do a business here. Well, if somebody outside the neighborhood owns this business here, people from the neighborhood spend money gathers here, and then they just siphon the money, and it goes outside the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So it goes outside the neighborhood, and it's not really recycling here. Then all of a sudden, cash is hemorrhaging from this neighborhood. So now, if this money is not really helping a lot of people out, then all of a sudden, that's less income, that's less employment. Then if you have the vicious cycle of, okay, property values, and then taxes, and then schools being funded based on property values, and then you see the vicious cycle that results. So if you say, I want to own a business here, it has, multiplicity of effects. Yeah. And so the whole purpose is, if I make sure cash is flowing in this environment, in this neighborhood, then it can be able to help uplift the community and give people employment, and so that $1 can exchange 5 hands. Yeah. And then so there's nothing, when you see change is not necessarily the outcome, but it is a process that we have to get used to. For example, if you walk into a house and it's messy, right? You say, man, I have to clean up, I have to change this. Well, the outcome you might be thinking is change, but the real change is this maintenance of a system of order, the consequence of which is then the tidiness. So the question is, what system can I maintain to ensure order? And I think that is what we have to look, instead of saying outcomes, but what are systems that we can maintain to create these desirable effects. And by the time you start implementing systems, and you make systems and the cause always greater than the individual, then that's when you have a healthy foundation for, I think, something real.
Right.
Yeah.
I just, we say these things, and I just wonder, how do we actually like make it come to life, you know?
I was thinking the same exact thing.
You know?
We can sit here and have a conversation all day, you know? And a lot of times people have ideas, but don't have the means. And I don't mean financially, I mean just the means to execute them. That's why you need a team. That's why the conversation should be outside of just us three. That's why I like the idea of this, because it'll be accessible to more than one individual, more than 3 or 4 individuals, because you can't do anything on your own.
Right.
And we were talking about, needing outside help. A lot of times, the people that we know, in our own families, in our own communities, we may not know that they are linked into some things, I run into people all the time, and you just have a conversation with them and you realize, man, you're into this, you're into that. So I think the conversation has to go beyond the living rooms and, the water cooler and stuff like that. I think you really need to go out there and find individuals who can help promote your ideals. Because once you do, that's when you find out, oh, this person's into this. All right, so maybe he can talk to this person, that person, do this, do that. I'm sure Mark Zuckerberg might have had some idea of how this social networking thing could work, but he had to talk to other people who had computer knowledge, who even knew what a social media thing was all about, who understood what he was saying. I think a lot of times we are limited in our own idea of what this can actually do. I know, for instance, as a writer, for years people were saying, you need to write a book. And I'm like, all right, well, I'll get on stage and I'll do a couple pieces. I'll talk to 20 different people or 30 different people at one time. And then someone said, but if you write a book, there are millions of people who have access to that book who can read your book. And then I wasn't even thinking on the terms of maybe something I can say can spark something in someone else. I just was like, I like doing poetry. I like rhyming, So it took me, like you said, you got to change your mindset first. It took me even thinking it was possible to influence a person.
Right.
So that I can be like, all right, well, I'll write a book and hopefully, touch a couple lives and, that'll be great. But even that is still a limited point of view. I think you have to take the chains off of your abilities and the effects and the influences of your own abilities. Because I think a lot of times people just don't realize how effective they can be.
Okay. You have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I was actually talking about this yesterday with a family friend of mine. Okay, how do you go about it in a very practical way? And I think the question you have to ask is, what exactly am I passionate about, right? What rages in the soul like a forest fire whenever I think about issues? For some people, it could be after-school activities. For some people, it could be, meals for children. For some people, it could be, the college admissions process. And if you're passionate about something, then the question arises, what are current existing organizations and what are they doing, and do they have any cohesion? Because one of the greatest flaws is that you have an idea, you pursue it, but wait a minute, you have to know what's existing first. And once you know what is existing, you see, once we communicate with each other, what are the deficiencies and what's the next step we need to take? So I think it is, what issues do you care about? Being a writer myself, having my blog and started a book that's a couple hundred pages, I haven't finished yet. But for me, I'm passionate about that, so I can spend hours doing that. And so you just have to identify what you're passionate about, what are organizations existing that do that, and what is the next step in what we need to do in order to create that. And I think that is a very basic and practical way to start off. Because once you get people who have a similar idea or vision, or at least complementary vocations in a space, then there's a flow of ideas that occur and inspiration that happens that you cannot, soothsay beforehand.
Yeah.
So that is the first practical step that I'd recommend, and that's what I'm doing in pursuit of my higher education doctorate degree. So I'm in a situation where I have access to information and resources so that I can exact the changes that I wish to on the most practical level with little hindrances.
Yeah.
So my takeaway from that is find out what you're passionate about and do your research and figure out how to advance it and to make it come to life.
What is pre-existing?
Find out what is pre-existing
And the next step.
and the next step. And I had a takeaway from you too, but I just lost it.
It's all right. It's all right.
We're gonna wrap this up but any last comments or do you guys have a takeaway from this whole conversation we've had or anything?
Yes, I mean, I'll say my takeaway is anytime we think of change, not thinking of any grand effects, but think about a particular vision you have and how I can start off small to make a change. And are you okay with never being known or seen? And in addition, are you okay with you having a vision and someone else already implementing it or is in the process of doing so, and you take a secondary role?
Yeah.
Because if your ego can't handle not being popular or taking second fiddle to a vision, then what you really want is self-adulation
Right.
and self-glorification and less of service. So I think asking oneself those questions and being able to start off small and do things to the best of your capacity and to find out what is existing and what is it and what needs to happen and what in my experiences and the lessons of my experiences can I use as a step ladder to help someone else and to ennoble a process, an existing condition. I think that is a realistic first step for me that I'm trying to take.
Yeah. My biggest takeaway was when you mentioned having something that once you start including people in it, if those people leave, it's still going. It won't collapse. And that kind of was the theme or the thread of the entire conversation. You talked about slavery, you talked about segregation, how those things were, the changes were implemented to abolish those things. It was, once it got to that point, it wasn't going to fail. If Lincoln never signed the Emancipation Proclamation, if Lyndon never signed the Civil Rights Act, someone was going to. That was going to move forward. So I think that really was, it impacted me because if you do have something that can't be compromised, regardless of who's involved, then it's going to succeed and it's going to affect the change that you want. So that's the main key for me.
Vision is greater than you, not you greater than the vision.
Right.
Exactly.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you guys for being here.
Thank you for having us,
Courtney.
Thanks, and tune in next time.